I'm going to turn things over. Where is Dean Karlan? Okay. To Justine Zinkin and Dean Karlan. Justine is the executive director of Credit Where Credit is Due, and Dean is an esteemed professor of economics at Yale University, where he also runs an immense nonprofit in its own right, the Innovations for Poverty Action. And he's someone who has often collaborated with nonprofit organizations to evaluate their impact in anti-poverty programs.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And so I think the plan is I'm going to talk hopefully somewhat briefly and then turn things over to Justine, who is the counterpart on one of the projects I'm going to talk about a lot. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did to motivate what we're doing here in New York. We did some work overseas first and then over here. And then I'm also going to talk about a new idea of something that we are keen to do, and then hopefully turn it over for more discussion. Okay, so there's this great quote. It's very straightforward. I think this is not news to anyone, but it helps to motivate kind of the thinking behind a lot of what we've been working on. And it has a lot to do with how people deal with temptation. That's the overriding theme. And this fits in many facets of our life where we see tensions. But the quote from the Odyssey, which motivated the title of the academic paper we put together, which is called Tying Odysseus to the Mast. But you must bind me hard and fast so that I cannot stir from the spot where you stand me. And if I beg you to release me, you must tighten and add to my bonds, right? So there's this basic idea of someone who's self-aware, who knows they're going to have temptations. And the question is, how do we go about fixing that for ourselves? And there's many ways that people do that on their own, right? There's no business, there's no nonprofit, there's no government doing it for them. They kind of figure out little devices and tricks, and it might be things that are as simple as not ordering wine at dinner in order to make sure that one doesn't order dessert at dinner. That's something I often do. So there's many informal things that we all might find ourselves doing, and that's a good way of solving it. Just as a side note, I personally have solved that particular problem because I really like wine, but I do want to avoid the dessert. So what I often will do is if I'm at dinner with Ray or Eldar, I would turn to them both because I know that they will hold me to it because they know that I really want them to. And I would tell them, if I order dessert, I owe you $1,000. And then I can have my wine and I'm happy. And I won't get a dessert for $1,012. So that works. But that's, informal, and, that's not exactly implementable from a government perspective or a company's perspective, right? But the point is there's many informal things that we often will do, and one of the things we're looking at is how does one build that in to the way we think about product design and things. So some of the backing up from that a moment, I just want to make it clear that I'm honing in on one particular issue, but a lot of the solutions that we talk about and a lot of the ways that we actually talk about designing products, there's often a separation between nice, clean theory in terms of economics and psychology of decision-making and then the way products are designed. And, there's no one product that is going to take one particular bias that we exhibit from a psychological perspective and then just design an entire product around that one bias. It is something that requires understanding the full picture of the types of things that we do as humans that are silly, understanding the heterogeneity in the sense that we don't all make the same mistake, and thinking through how we can then take those ideas and then design products that use common sense around a better understanding. So some of the other issues that we're also very keenly aware of and do factor into many of the things that we're involved in have to do with limited attention. It could be attention to future needs that you have in life. It could be about attention to risks that you're facing. And this could lead to undersaving, for instance. If you're just not thinking about all the future things that you're going to need money for, then you don't save enough for it. We did a simple test of that, for instance, with Sendel in the back and who's speaking next, or an hour later, where we sent people simple reminders to save, and it had led to increases in savings. It was the cheapest way to increase savings that we could possibly think of. We did something else that was even simpler, which was we just gave people accounts that had a label on it. So that was just acts as a little bit of a reminder, a little bit like a mental account. It was like the biggest nothing ever. In fact, I was a little embarrassed when we went to get funding for it because I kind of was afraid they were going to say, wait, you want how much money to do what? This is nothing. You're nothing. You're just offering them an account that has a name on it, and that's it. It was the simplest thing. But that increased savings by 30% in Ghana. So there's things like this that focus in on attention that we think might matter a lot. I'm going to go kind of quickly through some of this lead-up stuff. But so, when it comes to finances, we know that setting goals can be very hard, and we know that the data, if one does not have a plan, and most people do not have a rigorous plan, whether they're wealthy or poor, it's very hard to stay out of debt. And one of the reasons for that is because, in some sense, debt is more friendly to us than savings. Why? Because it's the friend that's always there, right? And so if you don't plan ahead, but you do have access to credit, whether it's at good or bad terms, I don't know. Let's not go there yet, but it's there, right? And so if it is there, you don't need to plan ahead. It's just right there next to you. But savings is not right there next to you if you don't plan ahead, right? You can't just say, ooh, gosh, I need to do something. Go to my savings account, right? If you're poor. And so that's an important reason why when we think about failures on the planning side, what often that leads to is a prediction, if there's a failing, that people will have more debt than is optimal if they have a moment of reflection, and less savings than is a moment of reflection. And one other point, which I don't know if Eldar and Stendhal will talk about, but if they do, they'll say it much more eloquently. But these issues of fallacies are often, we tend to think of them as much more important in terms of the cycle of problems that occur for the poor, right? Because one problem leads to another, leads to another. So if everybody in this room, I'm going to just be presumptuous, makes a mistake and screws up and loses $100 because of something, what's going to change in your life? Right? Probably absolutely nothing. But I know for a fact that, for instance, my regular taxi driver, who's always going hand to mouth, and so I learn a lot about actually household finance and low medium income from my taxi driver, because I don't drive, so all my airport runs I spend an hour and a half learning about her personal finance issues. And it is quite clear, as pointing cases, as of this very moment, she is indebted to me for my next taxi ride, which I have prepaid, simply so that she can get enough money to do her taxes, so that she can get enough money to get her health insurance, so that she can fill out her health insurance, so that she doesn't get slammed with a $10,000 medical bill, right? And if I didn't give her that $170 loan to pay for my next ride to JFK, it's not really clear to me what she would have done. It was a downward spiral, right? And so these are issues which are very real, but for people here, obviously, and for the top some percent, these are mistakes which we can all live with. So commitment contracts, this is back to the main theme, in some sense can simply be put as a way of making your vices more expensive and your virtues cheaper. That's the basic theme to it, right? So in economics, we often tend to think that innovation and things that bring the same good and make the price cheaper is good, systematically, right? It just expands your choices. With your existing budget, you can now buy more things. Right? And this is a way of thinking that says, well, actually, that's not always necessarily the case. And there might be things that are bad that we don't want, but that we do. We do in the moment, right? And so if we really had our choice, we would just make it more expensive. Think about the dessert example I gave you. That's my vice. How do I make that more expensive? Well, I can't just go to the maitre d' when I walk in and say, no, please give me the menu with more expensive desserts. They don't do that, right? It's not in their interest. So how do you go about making those things more expensive? So I told you my story. It's a very simple one. But there's many ways of doing this across other domains, savings and weight loss and smoking and exercise. So in savings, which is where I'm going to come to with the two examples from research, we made it so that the vice, think about the vice as simply withdrawing your money before you've reached your goal, right? And we made that more expensive by saying you can't do that. Right, so it's a very simple. We took the price almost to infinity by saying you just can't do it. Now, it wasn't exactly infinity because in both instances there were always clauses to get out. If you have a medical emergency, you moved, things like that. So it wasn't quite infinity, but the point is it raised it high enough that people would not withdraw the money until they reached a goal. And so we've done this in other domains. In fact, I started a kind of a thing on the side called Stick, which is a website you can go to where you can do this for any facet of one's life. You put up money, or you can put up social shame. You can put up a contract that says, if I don't do what I say I'm going to do, email Ray Fisman. And he will be, and then I'll just be too embarrassed to be like, oh gosh, I didn't do this. And maybe it's something that Ray even can observe whether I do. So I just did this with a former graduate student who has now, in month 8 since graduating, has not submitted his job market paper that he wrote, his main chapter of his dissertation, for publication to a journal. Meanwhile, I have a paper with him that I want him to be working on, but I care about him, so I want him to do his paper first and then the one with me, right? But I'm bottlenecked. So for purely selfish reasons, I just made him write a contract yesterday for $3,000 that he has 3 weeks to submit his paper to a journal for publication. And I'm the referee. So now he did this on the website. So now if he, because he will forward me the email and I will get to see that, yes, in fact, he submitted this paper to a journal and all as well. So we have other contracts just to give a sense of the creativity that have been fun. No email or talking to him at least the morning of January 7th. Sometimes it's very cryptic what we see, right? But you can get some flavor for it. Speaking more slowly to foreigners in New York City. This is something I've been told I should do. But that person actually put money at stake too, $120. No more dating losers. And just the same way that what I refer to as that kind of verification step, that's the referee, which sometimes you can have and you don't have to have, but that person actually named someone as the adjudicator if she dated a loser. The other thing that you have to always remember with things like this, though, is they have to be realistic, right? So if I wrote a contract that said I'm not going to eat for a week, that would be silly. It would be bad for me, right? But same thing. If you write a contract that says I'm going to save $1 million, well, that's stupid, right? You got to be realistic about your goals. So one of my other favorites is this person who wrote a contract to smoke less weed Monday through Friday, right? So realism is important, and it's a failed system if you're too ambitious. So you have to be this whole thing. You have to be self-aware. You have to be self-aware about your weakness, but you also have to be self-aware about what's actually possible for you to change, right? You got to get both of those right in order to get it right and make commitment contracts work. And this is one reason why we think for a lot of these that there might be some integration with thinking about products and some form of counseling or training that has to go along with it, right? That it's not a silver bullet to change behavior, right? Just change prices and you're done, right? It helps. It makes a big difference when the prices are aligned to get the behavior that someone wants, but they have to be self-aware both about what they can do and what they are not, both about what they will do if nothing changes, their failures, and their likely failures, and what they will, what's actually realistic. Okay. So here's what we did in the Philippines. So we set up this thing called a commitment savings product in the Philippines. It was called SEED, Save, Earn, Enjoy, Deposit. Apparently, this is like the big marketing thing in the Philippines. We were told everything we did has to have a nice acronym to it that has a double meaning. And so this is like you look around at consumer products and they're all done like this. So it was a very simple rule. We wanted to just be as simple as we could about it. There were no withdrawals until the goal was reached. And you set up a goal, which was a date or a time at the future. Oh, I need a clock. Is there a... What time did... What can someone tell me the timing here?
It's 5 to 10. You can simply go for 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay, that's good. Can you give me a 5-minute one? Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so 28% of the people opened this account. Now, 0% would have been a failure. 100% would be a failure. Right? Not everybody wants this, right? If you're perfectly, you're tying up your money. So if you're handling things exactly optimally, exactly as you wish you would in a moment of reflection, you do not want this product, right? And so, the same way that I would not, if you're someone who eats perfectly healthily, there's nothing wrong with it, dessert, right? So you should go and have the dessert. You wouldn't want to write a contract that says make this dessert $1,000 more. So we don't want everybody doing this. 28% we were fairly happy with. I don't have an optimal number for you as to what's perfect. But the kicker was that we saw a 300% increase in the savings for those who opened an account. This is everything I'm going to tell you are results from a randomized trial. I won't go into the details of how it was set up, but everything here is always going to be, every result I ever give you will always be the impact on the treatment group relative to a control group. So that 300% is for those who took up. So if we just look at everybody offered, the 100%, not the 28%, then it was an average of about 83% increase in savings, which is really big. Let me skip some of this. Everyone... this is just to give you a flavor of kind of what was happening. There's a little mascot was created for it. This little saving dude. And everybody got a nice little certificate that said, "Here's my goal," and this is, kind of to kind of solidify in their mind, this is my commitment. It's to do X, and they got this little certificate. So the other main result is that this improved power in the household. One of the big issues, this is not as talked about in the United States, but in developing countries, a very central issue that permeates through all sectors of life and policy, whether it's health or education, often has to do with household bargaining issues and the relative power of men versus women in the household. And microcredit, for whatever it, for in terms of how it's been promoted and sold for a long time, was promoted and sold as a panacea in the fight against poverty. We did randomized trials on that, and that is just clearly not the answer. It's not the panacea against poverty. It is not, when you look at household income shifts, you're just not seeing them. Now, that does not mean it's bad, but it's just not delivering on this kind of silver bullet promise. One thing that's always striking to me is when these studies came out, that a lot of the more evangelical supporters of microcredit said, "Oh no, but it wasn't about household income. It's not about poverty. It was about power for the women in the household." Well, the striking thing there is we did test for that too in those credit studies. It just didn't get as much publicity as the income because it's not the main thing, and we found nothing there either. But when we gave women a savings account in their own name, then they had more power after only 1 year, and we saw actually significant shifts in the actual purchases that were made in the household towards durable goods that were more household-centric rather than things like autos and bicycles that were probably more male-centric in terms of who would use them. So we saw this really strong impact on household power, which I think is very important to recognize, and particularly when you compare it to the microcredit results. Now, the magnitude in real dollars were small in terms of numbers that from a U.S. perspective, but were large in terms of expenditure. So, for instance, our average impact was about 150 to 200 pesos, which is equal to a doctor's visit, public school fees. So, just to give you a flavor in terms of the magnitudes here, these were noticeable amounts of money that people were able to save up for. Okay, so this motivated a lot of other work to try to see. So this was kind of a starting point, right? Here's a very simple account, and obviously then there's lots of questions about how to build from there. And one obvious question is always about the external validity of a result, right? This is a critical question. Anybody who sells you one study from one place at one point in time and says, voila, let's go change policy, you should, take pause. But there's two ways that we evaluate whether a study is useful somewhere else. One is internal validity, and the other is external validity. Internal validity asks, well, do we believe the results of what they found there? Right? And that's what randomized trials really help us out with, is they improve that internal validity so we can really confidently say, no, in that setting, we really think this product caused that change. External validity basically comes from theory. Right? And it comes from saying, okay, so this is a randomized trial, and these were the conditions under which it worked, and this is the theory of why it worked, and that theory should tell us something about where else to do it. And the minute we have that theory, then we can learn more and make better prescriptions in other settings. So let me give you a really silly example, just because a friend of mine here happens to be in the room, Alyssa Fisman, who works with us at Innovations for Poverty Action on our international deworming program. So deworming, tested across 8 methods. Intestinal worms, getting the intestinal worms out by giving children a cheap little pill, turned out to be the most cost-effective way of increasing school attendance by making the children healthier. Right? So there's a theory here that talks about the links between being healthy and going to school. And there's a theory here that says when there's high infestations of intestinal worms, that then if you get the worm out of the body, then this leads to better health. Right? And so that theory should tell us something. This is going to sound really stupid, and I mean to sound stupid, just to give you an example that when I say theory, it doesn't have to be deep. Right? So there's a theory here which says where there are worms and high infestation rates and lack of school attendance, this is a good approach. So this is why, because we understand that theory, that you have not heard anybody talk about massive New York City-wide deworming programs. Right? There's no worms here. Right? So that's not a rocket science point. It's just a point of external validity that we have to understand the theory, which is under these conditions, and this is the whys of why that program worked, and it tells us something about where else to go. Commitment savings is not something that has that type of barrier geographically, right? This is an issue. Issues of temptation apply to everybody around the world. Different facets, different ramifications, different economic environments in which the issues of temptation regarding savings and expenditure will play in. But this very much motivated the idea of taking this to the United States. And in fact, in the United States, we've seen products that do this. Certificates of deposits are, in a sense, a commitment savings account. It's one that actually pays a little bit of a premium, too. The problem is you can't go easily into banks and keep depositing to add to certificates of deposit, and you usually need a big minimum, right? And so that's one reason why they're not really that accessible for the poor based on that structure. So we worked with Justine to develop something that was basically like a commitment savings account built around a certificate of deposit so that people could like add little dribbles to it, and they didn't have some big massive minimum account opening fee. And so that's what we worked on with Justine. And so I'm going to leave these in here in case I was assuming these are kind of if they're made accessible to people, but I'm not going to go through all the details of the account. So we also had in this study a counseling arm where we wanted to see about providing financial counseling, but I won't talk about that. But, so we had. Where do I want to go? Here we go. Nope, sorry. Well, the number is 20%. About 23% of the people offered this account said yes. But we do not, when we look at the outcomes, so we find, this is not experimental what I'm showing you here, this is just looking at those who opened the account, and you see that 28% of the participants saved an amount greater than or equal to their goal. So that seems like a success. Ooh, ouch. I'm going to go about a minute over. Is that okay? Justine, will you kill me?
We'll see.
Okay. 28% saved what they said they would do, and that seems like actually a good success. But when we compare the actual outcomes to the control group, the study was not large enough. All the things were kind of pointing in the right direction, but the statistics, the sample size was not large enough to get the similar results as we did in the Philippines. So we see that, for instance, the end of quarter balance goes up by 8%. But that's not a statistically significant result, so our takeaway from this project, I'm not going to go through all of this, is that this is one of the issues that we often find is when setting up studies of this nature is sample size is a big problem, and it's hard to do tiny little things and then really learn things from that are confident statistically unless you have a treatment effect that's really, really, really big. But that's just not realistic. Most things don't lead to massive transformation. The search for the silver bullet is a problem, right? The fact is this is a somewhat small change. It's an important one, but it makes a big difference when you have enough people. So. There are further things that we're trying to do with this. We're kind of led to be hopeful because of these results, but not. But it's certainly not. The silver bullet as we did it here in terms of the outcomes. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'll be brief, I promise, is one of the new things that we want to do that Justine and I have been talking about, and it's just in the talking phase at this point. But it's a very common practice when someone is in debt to teach them to save. And I've never understood this. It's always frustrated me. Now, I mean, I can understand it in a couple scenarios, right? So we know in general that borrowing high and saving low is not a good idea, right? All else equal, right? That's you go to imagine Wall Street traders would get fired quickly if they kind of got it wrong and kept buying high and selling low. So why do people hold both? Why do we see a very common practice of holding both debt and savings at the same time? There are some sensible stories that make sense. One is liquidity, right? The debt is not liquid, but the savings is, and you just see transactions. I do that, right? But for a small amount. A second is limited liability. Well, my debt is owed to one place, and my savings is over here, and if I have an ability to actually go into default. And yet protect my savings, right? So that's a different beast. So there are some rational stories. Neither of those really apply to the magnitudes that we're talking about. When you look at the numbers, that cannot explain what we're seeing. A third is transaction costs. This is the one that perhaps applies in my life. I have a home equity line of credit, and I'll keep money in my savings in my checking account. I don't always move everything over. If I end up with a surplus for a few days, that would just be a pain in the butt to just be constantly trying to zero that out, all for $1 here and $3 there. So there's a transaction cost to it. Again, these things just can't add up. Right? They don't make sense in the magnitude that we see the behavior taking place, particularly when the spread is really high and people are at 18 or 25% interest rates on their credit cards and then holding savings accounts. Or in developing countries, it's even worse. We'll see people borrowing at 100% and then putting money in a 0% or negative interest rate savings account. This makes, it's really hard to think how the first three things I just named add up to justify that type of loss. And that's real loss. That's real money going out the door that they're not getting. That's the money pump. So there's some behavioral stories that explain why people do this. One is about mental accounting. It's a very irrational mental accounting story in the sense that it says they really have this huge value for something they call savings over here. And just having that labeled as savings locks that in and helps them be able to engage in that activity, whether it be health or something like that. One is about just lack of knowledge and awareness. They just don't understand because no one has explained this to them, and the banks aren't interested in doing it because they're making a lot of money off of this, right? And so they don't have the incentive to sit them down and go, you really ought to pay your debt down faster to us with your savings account. A third is social norms, which is kind of like the second in the sense that it says I learn from others around me, and others around me are making the mistake, and so I don't deviate. I just do what I learn from others. What else? There might be other things to kind of explain this behavior, but what we want to do is set up a portfolio account. And it just keeps in mind to remember that there's no theory of banking which says that this is the way to go and do things. The theory of banking is about intermediation of capital from between people who have money and people who need money, and it's about facilitating payments. But at no point do we put into the theory of banking that it's about doing this to an individual. So the net portfolio account is very simple, and the idea is to give people the mental accounting of two accounts, but really only one. Give them an account that actually just has positive and negative balances in reality. When it's negative, they pay interest. When it's positive, they earn interest. But give them a portfolio statement and give them the separation and the mental accounting that they need and that they want in order to feel like they're making progress towards savings goals and specific future needs that they have. And so that's the basic idea that we're brainstorming on and trying to do. And so I'll skip out on these next two things. Thank you, everyone.
So Ray, quick question. How long should I talk so that I can make sure there's time for some discussion? 15, okay, I'll try to be even shorter than that. So hi, everyone. So thank you, Dean. And I want to start by saying that almost exactly 10 years ago today, on June 3rd, I graduated from Columbia Business School. I was in the first social enterprise class. And 2 weeks later started at what was then Credit Where Credit Is Due, now Neighborhood Trust. So it's wonderful to be back here at Columbia Business School. I will also say that when our organization was insolvent and wondering if we were going to survive, Robinhood came along and sort of rescued us and invested in us over the past 8 years to grow. So I feel like I'm sort of home and with my greatest supporters. So it's wonderful to be here. I'm going to try to be very, very quick and talk a little bit about Neighborhood Trust, who we are, what we're about. Then I want to get into specifically why the concepts that Dean discusses, behavioral and economics theory, to us holds such immense promise in terms of the fight against poverty, and specifically in terms of enabling low-income individuals to achieve financial security. We think there's a lot of sort of nation ideas out there that really need greater investment in terms of sort of testing and evaluating. So then what I'm going to do is go into a few of our sort of creative ideas that are in the very, very early phases, with a real focus on sort of the two greatest challenges that we see. One is shifting people from being unbanked to banked as a critical component of that sort of path to financial security. And the other piece, which Dean alluded to, is about debt, sort of the corollary to savings. But what we see is consumer debt is really the great crisis out there among low-income individuals. So just a step back about Neighborhood Trust. We have a mission of financial empowerment. We're about enabling individuals to sort of translate small wages into financial security by enabling a more productive relationship with the financial services system. So we really believe the solution needs to come both from behavior change from the consumer, a more financially informed consumer, but also from changes in the marketplace, opportunities to innovate around financial product and financial product delivery design. We are unique in that we're a 501c3 nonprofit married to a community development credit union. We are very proud of this model because it enables us to not only offer the package of financial counseling as well as financial products, but also to use the sort of different legal structures that we have to really be a laboratory for innovation, which is why IPA has been such an amazing partner. And to walk through sort of a few key elements of our model, you'll see these sort of three circles over on your right. So the first is that we're all about delivering very effective financial counseling services. It's very much about the human touch. And making sure that our financial advisors are very well equipped not only to engage people and establish a trusting relationship, but actually to also be equipped to deliver the product and not just give people information, but enable that relationship to become an action-oriented relationship. The other piece is that we're about embedding our services in sort of complementary environments where the financial issue is relevant, it's timely. Again, it sort of encourages action. And, it's nice to be here. I will say many of our partners are in this room, and it's been a wonderful model, per Deputy Mayor Gibbs' comment, the concept of sort of bringing the financial component into other poverty-fighting initiatives and really seeing it as a sort of collaboration has sort of been a key to our success. And the final piece is on the product design, which I'll be getting into a little bit later. Today, we reach 6,000 New Yorkers all around the city. They have average incomes of $18,000. Average consumer debt of around $5,000 with average interest rates of around 25%. Over half of them are unbanked, have no relationship with a financial institution, whatever. Over 75% have subprime credit scores. So we're talking about a population that is largely working with earned income, but still struggling, living month to month. And a brief comment on how we define success. We believe that the right intervention for us to provide is this package. It can't be about the counseling component alone. It has to be about enabling someone to have that trusted relationship so that they're motivated to change their behavior and sort of, have sort of greater optimism about the future. But they also have a plan, and they also have a productive banking relationship that enables that plan to be realized so that we can achieve the following outcomes with a big focus on sort of improved balance sheet, improved net worth, which relates to all the other pieces, being able to stick to a budget, be a long-term thinker, and sort of have greater self-confidence about their own financial future. And again, a key piece of what we do is to marry the financial counseling to product design. And, again, I will say all of our work today is highly influenced by behavioral economics. One of the principles that we really believe in is that we're much more effective in getting people to take up and use products effectively if instead of being sort of agnostic and providing a million options, we actually boil it down to a few very simple, very select options and sell those and really say to somebody, you really do need this product. And we're going to make it really simple for you. And one of the core things that we do is, as we have a financial counselor in the community, they may be at Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation, that counselor actually can open an account right then and there in the context of that community-based organization. So again, that ability to sort of fight against people's sort of inertia or sort of worry about making a commitment or taking action, we sort of come up with sort of the no excuses list. We're here already. We can do this right now. It's very simple. There's only one option. Let's really think about how why you shouldn't do this. And usually people are very excited to be given that discipline. And this is sort of a summary that builds on Dean's comments. But if you think about the concept of behavioral economics, they are very, very real when it comes to helping the unbanked to become banked, thinking about reducing debt and helping people become more financially stable. And here are some comments about what we've seen in our own data, which is that in our credit union, the way people use our credit union and the way they talk about their own sort of financial behavior, they really welcome commitment strategies. They're very eager for someone to sort of force their hand. They're very excited about being given sort of an avenue and being, quite frankly, sort of told what to do. And on the flip side, they're very suspicious of the system. So the trusted relationship is probably the greatest value we add on the front end, because the banks don't have the right products necessarily for this population. And there also have been a lot of, relationships over time that have made low-income communities extremely mistrustful and sort of fearful of the banking system, and really believing that the personal relationship and being able to sort of see and touch their money is absolutely necessary. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to again try to talk really quickly, is go through sort of two challenges that we see on a daily basis, and some initiatives that we've just started. Some are sort of at the idea phase, some are at the pilot phase, and then I'm hoping we can discuss them. So this is really to build off of what Dean was saying. What you can see is that we work with a population that are struggling every day, and they care about being savers. They want to be savers. And so oftentimes they will start saving, but if you look at these statistics, I find them quite remarkable. So, almost all of our clients have credit card debt with, quite frankly, predatory rates, debt-to-income ratios of 60%. They can't afford this debt. And yet 20% of them have savings simultaneously, and 28% of those actually could be paying down their debt, but choose to have money in savings earning close to nothing while they're paying 25% on their debt. And what we've also found is that this sort of bias towards savings as having an inherent value is not just among our clients, but among sort of the broader financial counseling industry and among our own staff as well. It's a constant dialogue in our office, and here are some quotes that we've heard over time, both internally and externally. And I think that these are very sort of open to debate. I think there are a lot of people who will say, you know what, even if you're spending more by putting money in savings rather than paying down your debt, the sort of motivation that savings brings, sort of the positive sort of emotion that comes with talking about having savings, could be the necessary motivator to paying down debt over time. You have to believe that would be very extreme in order for the numbers to make sense. Again, you're earning 0 on your savings, paying 25% on your debt. And so to Dean's point, again, we're excited about playing around with this concept of looking at how to make people feel more positively about debt reduction so that the value of the debt reduction outweighs the value of the savings, given that financially it's so clearly in their best interest to pay down their debt. And I think I'm just going to let you read this for yourself and move on, but you can see that there are a lot of creative opportunities for using sort of words and visuals and thinking about the presentation of financial behavior and sort of changing it around a bit so that all of a sudden there's a lot more motivation to focus on debt reduction rather than savings. And the next piece is thinking about an actual, on the product side, having products out there that instead of encouraging debt, and I'm sure many of you are familiar that when you pay your credit card, when you get your statement, there's always that sort of minimum payment line, which really encourages people to sort of make that minimum payment. Again, it seems rational. Okay, if I make my minimum payment, I'm sort of doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm sort of I'm responsible, and yet all that's doing is sort of perpetuating debt. So what we have just launched with support from Innovations for Poverty Action is a credit card. People do love plastic, but it's actually less a credit card and more a debt reduction card. I'll say we just launched this product last month. We have a few credit cards that have been given out. But the concept here is to look at the way that people's behavior sort of helps keep them in debt and turn that on their ear to encourage them to reduce their debt. So we're basically giving people, this card is targeted specifically at people who have outstanding consumer debt. And we work with our financial advisors so that they can sort of look at someone's ability to pay, refinance the debt from, let's say, 25% to our 15%, and then come up with a regular payment that client has to make each month. because they're very comfortable with, okay, I just have to pay $20 every month, $20 every month. And by the way, maybe they were paying that same amount before, but now so much more of that payment is going to principal reduction rather than interest. But the other piece of it is usually as you pay down your debt, it means that your access to credit is going up if your credit limit remains constant. And so what we do is we build in a commitment at the beginning to say to someone, let's be clear, you really shouldn't be accessing new high-interest debt. But you do need access to credit. So we want you to know that your credit limit is going to go down as you pay down your debt. And you can commit to having it be even lower than that. Let's talk about how setting a sort of a goal around limiting your access to credit. So as their debt goes down by $1, they may earn 30 cents of access to credit. We just launched this product, but we're very excited about it and happy to discuss it more. To move on to the other challenge that we see every day is just the basic concept of sort of discipline around spending and managing money. And that when you're poor, you have much less cushion for error. But the reality is that today, many low-income populations, because they're shut out of the banking system, are often don't have sort of the discipline or the automation that many of us have, so that someone else or sort of a system is effectively managing their money. The power of online bill payment, the power of direct deposit is quite significant. So what we've seen is that, just to move into the solution, that there's immense benefit to, again, automating or making the default systems that encourage budget adherence. So when you get paid, instead of that money going into your pocket and you end up putting it into your own buckets, the concept of, again, committing up front, every paycheck I should be spending $100 to pay down my debt. Well, now your paycheck is direct deposited into your account. That $100 is automatically being paid to your credit card. You're automatically sticking to the plan without having to sort of think about it or be able to sort of get out of it, which quite frankly is probably the way most of us manage our money today. For low-income individuals, that's not the case. And just sort of one statistic, so today around 33% of low-wage workers are actually enrolled in direct deposit. And yet direct deposit is such a given in terms of sort of the value it gives someone to sort of not only access their cash for cheaper, but have a tool for improved money management. And again, here are other concepts that we're thinking about in terms of linking the direct deposit process to a budgeting process and a process that enables someone to better understand how their own paycheck is sort of linked to their financial goals. And I think I'm going to stop there and leave it on for questions.
Justine, that was extremely interesting and fascinating. Gail Magaliff, I'm the CEO of FEGS Health and Human Services, and we're a broad-based health and social service agency. And while we deal with many people in poverty, in this economic recession, we have dealt with many professionals who are in exactly the position that you describe. They've lost their jobs. They haven't been able to get back into the labor market. They've lost their savings. They've had a health issue, and they are absolutely in consumer debt. Is what you do available to essentially the middle-class community who are in need of what you're doing? Because it is usually applicable to them.
Is this working? Yes. So what I will say, first of all, is that our services are targeted at the working poor, but many of the individuals we serve are, making more money than that or less money than that. But also, we do have a major partnership with the Office of Financial Empowerment and run many of the financial empowerment centers around the city, enabling anybody who calls 311 and uses any kind of financial keyword to be connected to our services that are, 100% free, 100% open to any New Yorker. So again, while our mission focus is on individuals who are low income, we do offer those services, as do other nonprofits around the city, via the Financial Empowerment Center model.
I'm curious about looking at the participants in both of these kinds of programs through the lens of consumer behavior, and what leads them to be interested in participating in these kinds of programs when it comes to helping people come up with a personal financial plan. It's not the sexiest advertisement out there. And I'm just curious what draws people in to participate in the first place, and how can the rest of the field learn from that?
So we work with I would say sort of generally two populations, sort of a population in crisis and a population that's slightly more prepared to be in sort of planning mode. The in-crisis clients are often the clients we see in our financial empowerment centers when we're sort of in the community and people can drop in. What motivates them to think about that plan is truly a crisis. I'm not sure I can pay the rent. I'm worried about losing my home. I'm overwhelmed by debt collectors calling me. There's sort of this sense of being totally overwhelmed, so that they are driven to us out of sort of desperation. On the flip side, we have a more sort of comprehensive, structured 10-hour program called the Getting Ahead program that is similarly embedded in about 40 different nonprofit locations around the city, where we link the financial program to our partnering organizations' programs. So we work with a lot of workforce development programs. We work with domestic violence programs, housing programs, where we're actually able to take our program and make it a sort of a seamless part of the host organization's initiative. And there, it's very, very different. The motivation is because someone is sort of less about crisis and more about rebuilding. They're planning. They're sort of optimistic about their future. They just got a job, or they just are about to get a roof over their head. And they embrace the advice because they see it as a key tool to sort of succeed in where they're already headed. And I will say that when we look at when you sort of break out the impact of our work, it's very clear that we're more effective with individuals who have earned income as opposed to sort of being on fixed income or public assistance. We also have a lot more impact when we're working with people who are already sort of in that planning mode rather than in that crisis mode.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stefan Russo from Goddard Riverside Community Center. So I have a sort of a comment or a contextual question more. And I don't mean to this comment to because I think what you've presented here is fascinating, interesting. We do a lot of financial counseling, particularly around college access and credit was due. The problem I have with the discussion is, and I felt this for a long time, is that I worry that what we're really, really doing is helping people budget poverty. When we live in a society where we have really difficulty raising the minimum wage, where the income inequality is greater, the wages are suppressed, the percentage of unionized workers is suppressed, there's an assault around the country on public service employees. We can't raise the taxes, so we have no real, other than the earned income tax credit, which Linda's right, so we really have no movement in this country to try to sort of address systemically an income inequality, which would help. So how do you sort of deal with that, the fact that, because sometimes we're uncomfortable too, basically telling, how an $18,000 a year worker had to sort of budget your poverty better, which is important to do. So I'm just curious about when you go do this work and create these models, what's your thinking in terms of how, if we spent as much time doing this, trying to figure out how we politically changed sort of the income inequality and maybe we would be doing more than helping individuals how they budget poverty. So it's a little bit of a philosophical contextual, but I'm curious about your comments as you go forward, because to me, that's really one of the central problems we have, is this income inequality and the fact that wages are so suppressed and so low.
Sure. So let me give perhaps a self-deprecating response, which is, first of all, I think it's kind of like, suppose I were a medical researcher and I were just trying to learn more. I'm making this analogy as I go, so forgive me if it's bad. But suppose I was a dermatologist and I didn't deal with skin cancer. I just dealt with itchy rashes. Now, itchy rashes can really affect your quality of your life. Like if you really have a bad one, it could really make you pretty miserable. I don't know. I mean, I don't have one, but it could. And it doesn't mean that there isn't some other much something else, and people doing research on heart disease and cancer are obviously dealing with saving lives. And yes, I think if we had to say like we're going to choose one or the other, we're going to care more about the saving lives part. But so when it comes to financial services, no, we're not. No one. I don't think anybody. This is what we learned internationally is microcredit was sold as the panacea to solve poverty, and that's just not right. We're not talking about financial services to solve poverty and to rise up income to levels of making the people who are low income all of a sudden be able to have all the freedoms that the middle class has in America and up. But we are talking about how do you take your existing circumstances in terms of income and make it so that you're not so that you are able to have savings for when you need it and not spend a whole bunch of your income as a proportion of your income on financial transaction fees. That's just you're not getting anything for that. So that there is huge value that can be had by taking someone's existing situation moving up. And it's not to say that we don't need to think about job training or education programs and health programs that are all going to have their own independent and perhaps even bigger impacts on income, and that's important. But these are it's a question of focus perhaps.
In a way, I'm not sure about budgeting poverty, but it certainly prevents victimization. I mean, if people are more aware of what their choices are and have better investment instruments or savings instruments, and they understand what the consequence of debt is and the predatory practices of many commercial enterprises, it seems to me like that's a savings and that's a real value from a psychological standpoint. So in that way, Stefan, I think that is a positive effect. Maybe not directly, but at least in part.
So can I add something to that? So again, I haven't tested this, but I've always been very interested in the impact of our work on enabling someone to be a quote-unquote sort of short-term thinker to being a long-term thinker, and really seeing that as a component of enabling someone to believe they can get out of poverty or to think about sort of short-circuiting intergenerational poverty. And there are a lot of statistics around children who go to college having parents who see college as a foregone conclusion. And for a lot of parents, they may not say that to their children, they may not believe that because they can't afford it. But you can sort of look at the impact of our work on enabling, more cash to be available to that family and to shift from being in debt to savings, and all of a sudden college becoming a reality in that household as a goal, or being able to say, let's think about a long-term goal rather than getting through the month. And I think there's real power there, which is, again, nothing to, it's not to say it's more important than income inequality or, the battle around minimum wage. It's real, I think.
Alleviating poverty can't be one element. It's many, many elements. My name is Stephen Vogel with Grameen America. We are making loans to people who are living below the poverty line, and we require each one of our borrowers to save $2 a week, and we open up an account for them in a commercial bank, no fee, no minimum deposit. In the last 4 years, people living below the poverty line have deposited over $1 million into savings while they're trying to lift themselves out of poverty. The typical income of our borrowers is below $15,000. We're giving them an opportunity to increase their income through these loans. So I think that as a process, and as if we're trying to alleviate poverty, it can't just be providing them with a loan. It can't just be with providing them with a savings account. It can't just be with managing them, their income and their spending in poverty. It has to be a group event and trying to fix it. Our borrowers have no other opportunity. They can't get another job. Half of them have jobs, and this is supplementing their income. And the question is, how do you make someone feel better about themselves while they are in that condition and letting them lift themselves out? It's not a balance of paying 25% versus earning nothing. They don't have a choice. And so they need to have an opportunity to earn themselves out of their difficulty.
Pam Flaherty of the City Foundation. I want to go back to the theme earlier this morning about scalability and cost, and a lot of what you've talked about relies on a lot of human intervention and financial counselors, etc. And I think there's been a lot of discussion around the power of the concepts you're talking about, but to use technology or other ways to communicate with, to supplement the human touch, to make it, to make all of us able to reach more people. So I'd be interested in your comments on that.
So I'm thrilled to see your question because it's a challenge that we at Neighborhood Trust are working on right now. Again, when we think about success, we've always said that trusted relationship is part of the package of success, but we sort of thought about that more. We thought what we're really talking about is someone feeling like someone changing their behavior, and we don't necessarily care how or what motivates them, right? We just want to see that changed behavior. So we're looking at scaling right now by thinking about the systems that are already out there where individuals are already engaged in a financial relationship. So our real focus right now is on the workplace, but we're also looking at, are there opportunities to engage people when they pay their rent, or in terms of benefits, where because there's already a financial transaction going on, you could imagine scaling behavior change vis-a-vis enabling someone to open an account and enroll in direct deposit with one or two components of the plan in the context of where they're getting paid in the workplace. And the impact of that sort of systems change and enabling people to become banked and on direct deposit as part of a system they're already engaged in may very well have the same level of impact as our incredibly high-touch model right now. Our belief is, as we look forward in our own future, we don't want to lose that high-touch element entirely. The sort of human relationship is sort of we think it's very important. But it may not be as important to sort of getting the results we want if we look at ways to sort of automate improved financial behavior.
Thanks very much. I'd like to echo one of the... Yeah, you can go ahead and echo one of the a comment made in one of the questions that there was a fascinating discussion from both of them. My one regret, and this is a sort of obvious point, is I should have written a commitment contract with Dean before starting that would have transferred $1,000 per minute from him to Justine's bank account for every minute he went over. We're going to take a short break of about 20 minutes, and then we'll start up again with Eldar and Sendel. Thanks.